Buddy, for logging in and doing a little bit of trivia there. That's good fun. We could do the whole day of barrier trivia if you wanted, Kathy. No, you want to do safe system assessments? Okay. Well, first thing I want to do is provide a little bit of feedback on the assignments, and maybe even if somebody would like to volunteer, we could drop the little Street View man onto their intersection, and they could talk us through some of the factors that they saw that influenced exposure, likelihood, and severity. So if you're keen to do that, maybe pop your hand up yeah, just hand up or write it into the chat, and then we'll unmute you and you can have a little talk. And I'm sure if you're brave enough to do that, Kathy will have a lovely prize for you, no doubt. Yes, good. The thing that I suppose overall, really great road safety analysis of intersections, understanding where risks are coming from, some of those key fundamental things that increase risk. So I was really happy with that. And overall, the categorization of likelihood was excellent. Just picking those factors that influence the chance a crash is going to happen was really well done across the board. Severity was generally really well done as well, and the understanding that speed and angle and presence of vulnerable road users or larger vehicles with more energy are going to cause more severe crashes, and so that was pretty well done. The exposure was the one that was a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of what we were getting in, and this is, as I mentioned, probably one of the harder things with getting our head around in safe system assessments as such, because our traditional definition of risk, I mean, international definition of risk is likelihood times severity, or probability times consequence. What is the chance of an event? And then how bad is that event going to be? And so that's financial risk, health risk, environmental risk. It's all about the chance times the consequence, the severity. So when the safe system assessment framework came about, it pulled that exposure out of the likelihood, and that's where it got a little bit murky. And so it's completely understandable that people are still trying to grapple their head around that. So yeah, sorry, there's no PowerPoint at this stage. I'm just chatting. I can put something up if need be. I actually have some on exposure, which I put in there, which I purposely did last night to clarify this, which we'll get to. But I'm hoping somebody's going to put their hand up to take us through their site. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So we pull out exposure, which is really hard to sort of get your head around without seeing some definitions and getting some practice. But I've got some tips and tricks for that, and I think you'll find it fairly easy. But it looks like, well, we've got William. Awesome. So we've let William have the ability to unmute himself. Can we hear you, William?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello. Where are you calling in from, William?
Lovely Auckland, sunny Auckland.
Beautiful, beautiful. No, not the. What do we call Auckland? It's not the Windy City.
Was the city of Sails.
Sails, that's it.
Yep.
That's what I remember. Very good. And which remind me which intersection you have. How I'm going to see if I can find it, so we can all have a look. What's the intersection?
Yeah, what is the intersection? It's Junction Street and State Highway 3 down in New Plymouth.
Junction Street. Plymouth. Okay. Good. And this is one you know well?
This is one we're getting to know well. I was killing two birds with one stone here, because this may be relevant to a corridor that we're looking at.
Okay.
So I thought it'd be good to get your perspective on it, Ken.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Well, I'm glad you chose it. Okay. So I have that as a grade separated interchange. Is that the one?
No, that's not the one.
No. Let me. So Junction Street. It's going to be a different part of it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. So it's just
Hooks
southeast.
around.
Exactly.
Yes. No, I remember this one. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's good. Just give me a second. Oh, yes. No, this is good. Okay, back to Zoom, and then I'm going to share screen, and then we'll have a chat. So what I'm going to get you to do, William, is talk through the factors that you looked at that influence exposure, likelihood, and severity. And here we go. This is the one, eh?
This is the one. Yep.
So we might move a little bit closer. And what have we got? We've got a right turn facility there, and we've got it's on a sweeping band. What's the speed again?
Speed? So 100 on the state highway.
100 on the state highway. And do you have? Yeah, okay. I'll let you talk it through. All right. What are your factors?
So in terms of exposure, the lack of a separated shared path, and that the intersection currently allows all movements, so left in, left out, right in, right out, were the two main points I put for exposure.
Yep. Okay, that's good. I'm going to come back to that because you're right in the assignment, and when we get to state system assessments, there's a little bit of honing to do on that. But that's good. Okay, likelihood factors.
So sight distance on the approach to the intersection, and particularly, yeah, exactly, approaching State Highway 3. The narrow centre line
on the approach,
on State Highway 3, both on approach on.
Yep.
Apart from the chevron.
Yep.
Separation.
Yep. Before that, there we go. There's a better example, isn't it?
There we go. Yep. The speed, 100 km/h zone. They were my three likelihood factors. Yeah,
very good. Anybody else can type in a few that they see, and William, I'm sure you can think of more. I was going to say another interesting one would be that dynamic visual obstruction one, but this actually, the geometry of it's probably going to mean that if a truck was coming to do a left turn in there, you would still be able to see a trailing sort of masked car just because of that curved geometry. So that one, but it's interesting that it's turning across two lanes, isn't it? So that's going to be a challenging maneuver. Yeah, okay, good. And severity?
Severity, so the angle of the conflict. So it is a potential right angle conflict there with the Nissan that you can see in your screen pulling out with a potential another vehicle potentially using the overtaking lane on the southbound.
Yep.
So the right hand lane. So that would impact severity.
Yep.
There's a couple of potential, right angle or high angle conflict points on the intersection, and then speed as well. I couldn't. There are some heavy vehicles that use the route as well. So, I'm trying to recall whether it's an OD route, over-dimensional traffic route or not, but that could impact severity as well.
Yep. Well, that's excellent. And I think I probably gave you full marks for your assignment, because all those factors are exactly sort of what we were looking for in that assignment, to try to start to separate these into categories. And the way you're thinking about it, spot on. The exposure one is sort of really quite interesting in terms of a safe system assessment, because when we get to the safe system assessment scoring part of it, which we're going to talk a lot about in next module, but we boil the exposure scoring down to really the volumes. So the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists, the number of motorcyclists. Now, the assignment was sort of talking about what's going to influence though, like that exposure. And so some of you put in things about the land use around there, the presence of schools, and the like, which is all yes, going to influence it. But when we get to the next phase where we're actually doing those assessments, you really just, all you need to do is put the numbers in. Now, you might recommend changes that are associated with land use or from that pure scoring perspective. All we're interested in is the numbers. So those were really good factors that you identified there. The other one that we had to, I suppose, boil down in the safe system assessment framework, or it was boiled down, was this idea of the size of an intersection. So we've got quite a area where this car coming out is exposed to crashes at the intersection. However, I just used the term exposed, but we put that into the likelihood category when we're undertaking the safe system assessment, because we want to keep the exposure score to simply the number of vehicles that are present. So you could have a really big intersection, a massive intersection that hardly ever gets used, and then your exposure score would be low, but your likelihood score would be up because of that, large intersection. And then William did a really good job of identifying some of the likelihood factors there for the intersection crashes. But we could talk a bit about the likelihood of some of the other crash types. So we could talk about the likelihood of run-off road. So we've got the speed again. We've got the slight curve is going to increase things a little bit. The fact that it's an intersection itself is going to increase run-off road potential. Then you'd go through and you'd do that for cyclists, motorcyclists, pedestrians, even though I assume pedestrian volumes would be very low here, but we still do analyse the likelihood and the severity of anything that may still occur. And then we do the severity as well, and William did another really good job there. And but if we do again look at the factors that influence the severity of the run-off road crashes, for example, well, I'd be looking then at, okay, well, what have we got on the roadside here? We'd have a look and we'd go, okay, I assume that'll be a slip-based pole. Yep, good. We've got a slip-based pole, so that's going to lessen the severity if somebody leaves the road there. But we've got the good old iconic New Zealand paling fence there, which is not a safety barrier of any description. That's just basically delineation. So that's not going to assist in protecting road users from injury with the trees over there. So I'd say, presence of point source hazards in the roadside, trees and the like. But then the score that would bring it down a little bit is at least the light posts are frangible, slip-based light poles. And, you might think about the grade and the like there for likelihood. So this is again another one where you're defining between likelihood and severity in the roadside is an interesting one, because the presence of objects in the roadside close to the road is the increase in likelihood of crash. The fact that they're frangible or not frangible is the severity outcome we're talking about, because if you leave the road and you don't hit a hazard, you know, that's a likelihood because you get back on the road, unless you roll over, of course. The hitting the hazard, then we're into, okay, now we're crashing. What's the severity of that crash? Well, it depends on, you know, how the energy is dissipated and you know, is it a frangible? So frangible meaning breakaway on impact. Is it frangible? Is it a rigid? Is it a rock or something which is going to you know, destabilize the vehicle or snag it, and probably not as severe as a point source hazard, but it's going to cause some issues. So you're sort of trying to build this really sort of rich picture of the way risk presents itself in these areas. So well done, William. Kathy, definitely gonna give a prize to William there. Excellent effort. Now, have we got people commenting in the chat there? I saw something jump up.
Would it be worth chatting about the final safe system assessment score being a product score, as in exposure times likelihood times severity?
Yeah, I mean, we do spend the whole next module sort of working through that, how you score and how you get to these end products. But that is exactly right. So those aspects of exposure and likelihood and severity are how we arrive at scores for your safe system assessment under different crash types and road users. So we multiply the score for the likelihood times the score for the severity times the score for the exposure, and we get a score there. So thank you, William. Awesome work. I'm going to you away there. Okay. I'm going to share another screen to talk just a little bit more about this, actually, because it's an important point. And as I mentioned, this is exposure one, trips people up all the time. So if you got some commentary in your assignment about the exposure score, don't be too concerned, because heaps of people have this same challenge, and it's because there was a slight alteration in that term exposure under this safe system assessment framework. But that's exactly why we do a training course. So really, that safe system assessment score is the exposure times the likelihood times the severity. And we actually put some numbers to this when we get to actually doing the assessment. But the first thing that was most important is how you categorize each of these. And that's what we spent that assignment doing. And I gave you a few examples of things that influence the exposure the other time. So this one is still a little bit hard to see, but blocking off a road, an intersection, or the like alters the exposure, because the number of vehicles or pedestrians or cyclists will be influenced by that. The separated shared path facility changes the exposure, or removes the exposure to vulnerable road user crashes with passenger vehicles. So there's still a cyclist to pedestrian issue that could be present, probably a lower risk. It definitely is a lower risk issue than the passenger vehicle one. But those are sort of some of the factors that influence the exposure. Now, this is actually out of the Safe System Assessment Framework document from Austroads. It's a bit of a definition which might assist you. So road user exposure, this refers to which road users, in what numbers, and for how long they're using the road, and are thus exposed to a potential crash. The measures of exposure include AADT, so the annual average daily traffic, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, pedestrians crossing or walking along the road. So it's fairly much boiled down to just numbers, the numbers crossing, the numbers walking along the road, and the like. The one thing that had a lot of debate in the sort of 3 years since the assessment framework has come out and people have started to use it was around this the length of time that they are exposed within an area, and I talked there about the size of the intersection, use that example, because that one was eventually got clarity and made everybody comfortable in a certain way that happens. But yeah, sorry, what we've got is these 6 fact sheets that we've developed on some of these little intricate issues that that trip people up in the safe system assessment. And this one deals with exposure and runs through some of that. So Kathy, could we please send out these 6 fact sheets if we haven't done so already? This one deals with cyclist facilities, because at what distance from the road would a cycle facility change from being a likelihood of, reducing the likelihood of crash to reducing the exposure to a crash? So, these are the little intricate details of a safe system assessment that that we wanted to try to get a bit of consistency across people doing them. Okay, I'll pause there for any questions or comments at this stage about the assignment or any clarity around some of that exposure score. And I suppose you can get your mark and some commentary on your assignment by going back into Schoology, and I'm not sure exactly where it is in there. Kathy can probably show you at some point by sharing her screen.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And thanks to everyone who completed their assignment and quizzes. As Ken said, the information is in there on his commentary. I've popped those fact sheets in Schoology, so they're available to you. And thanks to Michael as well, who's put some good information in there, shared with everyone on those speed curves that you talked about, I think, in the first session, Ken.
Good. I'll have to get those myself and make sure I'm up to speed.
There's a bit of reading for everyone, which is always good. Okay, can you please confirm I was docked for the number of legs being under exposure instead of likelihood when the breakdown instructions provided in the assignment for the table also have the number of legs falling under exposure?
So when the breakdown instructions okay, I'm not sure what that last bit means, but I'll explain the issue and then I may have to revisit if that. So the number of legs on an intersection, so let's put lots of legs. Yeah, I see what, okay. This may be a little bit of slight difference between a safe system assessment scoring versus what might influence the numbers. So an intersection with 5 legs here is going to have a certain number of vehicles going through it, right? And those number of vehicles is the exposure, number of vehicles. If we scrub out this one and we've still got the same number of vehicles because they're still needing to go through there, it's the same exposure. Now, I probably was a bit harsh if I did dock you an actual mark for that, because you're obviously thinking about there were vehicles coming in here and there are not vehicles coming in here in this leg anymore. But really, I sort of see this as an entity, and unless by blocking this off they somehow go around this way or something, that's why the exposure score would potentially be staying the same. But yeah, I was a bit harsh if I did dock you a mark for that. So I'll revisit that one. Any other people have grievances on their score already? That's fair enough too.
That's how we learn.
Well, the challenge, I suppose, was that we were trying to categorize these things with an end game of this assessment framework, which we haven't quite got to the details of it. Now, I in reading the assignments, I could almost see that some people had been using the Safe System Assessment Framework before, and others probably haven't been ever used that methodology. So, yeah. Anyway, overall everybody did really well. So I'm better to make a note of that, Kathy, to look back at whose was it?
Yep, no, I've made a note. All good.
Yeah. Email me with tasks.
Yes.
Good. This is good. Good little bit of commentary on the assignments. I assume people are having a look at their scores and the like. Sorry, I'm just reading a couple of things. Okay. So this session, we'll keep your questions or comments coming in. We'll move around as we need. Kathy will monitor the chat behind the scenes. And this session, I suppose we want to wrap up this, I suppose, these principles that we've been thinking about and assist us in doing that assessment and coming up with really meaningful ideas for projects to integrate that are going to get us much higher alignment with safe system principles. And we want to do this by connecting movement and place or link and place or any sort of way to think about the hierarchy of your road network with safe system thinking. We want to identify key characteristics for vulnerable road users, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles, and to categorize risk factors for vulnerable road users into exposure, likelihood, and severity. So let's start with this idea of movement and place, and different jurisdictions use different slight tweaks on it, and somebody can sort of fill me in on exactly the way New Zealanders think about this idea of your road network not only being an absolute sort of movement corridor throughout everywhere, but some areas provide place value and some areas provide a higher movement function. And I suppose the easiest way to explain it is just to use one of the many types of movement and place diagrams that are available out there. And as I say, sometimes term different things. But I just grabbed the planning framework for Sydney. It's actually the old one, but I think it still does a decent job. So we don't want to get fixated on the terminology being used here, but we want to really concentrate on the principles. And the principles are that a road network, any bit of road out there or street, provides either a movement function or a place function or a combination, tries to provide a bit of both. So a movement corridor, I think, is fairly obvious, hopefully, to people. It moves people and goods. One of the common, I suppose, trip-ups in movement and place is that people correlate that movement solely to passenger vehicles, but it's certainly not that. It's any movement of people or goods. So it could be, public transport. It could be bicycles. It could be pedestrians in that movement. But the common easy ones to identify that they sort of sit out on their own as absolute movement corridors are things like motorways, and that is very obviously passenger vehicle and heavy vehicle dominated. the place function is this idea that a bit of road can provide this place value to a community, where it's an area for trade, for community interaction, for social cohesion, and all of this wonderful sort of things that people have defined as place. And I think that that's still, I suppose, emerging as to exactly how, how we define place and we quantify place value and those sorts of things. But all of those things are really, really good. So then what you do is you sort of say, well, where does my bit of road or street or intersection actually fit within the movement and place categorization? And so what you do is sort of start breaking up the road network and categorizing it in these areas. And so let's start with an area that's high place value down here and fairly low movement value. And we might see this as a shopping mall, a very, very busy, inner city laneway type area. And what these are termed, at least under the Sydney framework, are the places for people. Okay. If we go back and we say, well, this is actually, not as high a place value, and it's still not a movement corridor, a high movement corridor. These are usually our local streets. And so this is, you're just your local residential streets and the like. Now, the challenge you have with, I suppose, local streets and the like is we start to talk about these as low place value. Obviously, the individual residents don't like us talking about their local street as low place value. But in the scheme of the whole network and the relativity of it, we sort of have these as low place value overall for the collective of the community. But I suppose be careful with your terminology if you're out there doing your consultation and say, we made this decision because there's low place value here. That's not a good thing to say. Then let's go up to an area that has low place value, but high movement function. And we see these are the movement corridors. And these are very much our large arterial roads, highways, and the like, which still have a little bit of, place value to them here and there. And then we've got these challenging ones, which are high place value, high movement, and there are vibrant streets, or under this framework, they're vibrant streets. Those are the really, really challenging ones because they're sort of competing with all sorts of priorities there. They wanted to make it vibrant and permeable for pedestrians and really, these exciting lively areas, but they also trying to move corridors, move people and goods through there in reasonable time. So they become the challenging ones. But why do we possibly want this in a safe system assessment? Really, why do we care about this? And the way that plays out is that in assessing an existing bit of road, you actually, this does not change the scores that you'll give under a safe system assessment. But where it comes into play really heavily is when you start to make recommendations or ideas for consideration for the project team. Because as soon as we identify that which category it sits in, the kind of things we can alter in the road network or in the behaviour we want to see out of people, or in terms of drivers, pedestrians, cyclists and the like, you can get to that in a number of ways. So we can achieve high alignment with safe system principles in many different ways, and it depends what the function of that road is. Now, I think we've, as an industry, been doing this sort of thing intuitively for for many years. We sort of know what we're trying to do with that bit of road, and we come up with treatments accordingly. But again, this helps us a little bit in this clarity. And what I like to do in safe system assessments is ask for the movement of place assessment. That's a sort of different assessment that may have been done. If not, I sort of talk through what is the function of your road, what is the purpose of this road, what are you trying to achieve out of it from a land use management perspective. And if they say vibrant, if it ends up that they want to do everything, I start to push and say, okay, can we move it? Can we start to get some clarity? Are you really wanting to see this as a movement corridor, or is it more of a place that you want it to get to? And it's challenging, and the strategic planners don't like it because they're getting moved and they've got many competing objectives. But the more we can move it out of there, the better. And you'll see, I suppose, why that becomes a challenge in terms of if you've got all of these competing demands. But let's jump into some examples. I think it's always easy with some examples, isn't it? So here we go. We've got areas, places for people, and trying to make it more and more vibrant. So these are areas where they've been higher movement corridors, and they're starting to blanket them down, at least in tactical urbanism senses, with making them more places for people. And the COVID situation in a lot of the world has just accelerated a whole lot of stuff that's moved areas further into places for people quicker. So here's a little artistic sketch with lots of technical deficiencies in terms of the artist's impression of it. But what we've got here is a street, road, street area, and it's got a 40 km/h speed limit, and you can see it's got multiple different road users and the like. This area has now been categorized as a place for people. So I'll go back and just remind you there's place for people, low movement function, high place function, or at least the aspiration is to get it into much more a place for people. So what I'm going to get you to do in a second is just jot into the chat ideas on how we can alter this area to get better alignment with safe system principles, acknowledging and understanding that it has this place for people aspiration. But first of all, I'll take any questions that have come in, Kathy, if there's anything that's popped in at this stage, or we can do this little exercise.
Some people are keen to do the exercise, but we've just had a couple of comments. So Adam's saying in urban situations, it's better to refer to corridors as streets instead of roads, seen as roads implies a movement bias.
Yeah, I think that's a very good, a very good comment.
Excellent. And Michael's shared the Auckland Transport movement in place or roads and streets framework, which is pretty well aligned with what you showed earlier. So I'll also pop that one in Schoology as well for everyone.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that. It's good. It's good way to think about things, and it helps us a little bit. So let's jump back to this exercise then, and just pop into the comments anything you can, anything you want to alter to get us higher alignment with safe system principles, but acknowledging that this is a place for people, and it's being pushed by the strategic and urban planners to say, yep, we want this higher place value here. Okay, seeing lots of good stuff coming in. Now, for those who have already put something in, what I'd like you to do is have a think about what you suggested and have a think about whether that alters the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity of crashes. So if you've suggested narrowing the road, is that exposure, likelihood, or severity, or a combination, depending on some different scenarios. I'm giving it a second here because I'm seeing some great stuff coming in from people. Okay, this is good. So what I'm seeing there is some people coming in with looking to, well, the first one that grabbed me there was where did it go? Sorry. The idea to simply close the road. And that's close the road to passenger vehicles, to cars, to buses. And that's absolutely, I suppose, the first thing you'd look at. If you've identified that this is very clearly a place for people, or pushing to be this place for people, do we need to have any movement through there at all? And that's the sort of ideal situation, which really removes the exposure to crashes. So if we can do that, we've had this wonderful safe system win. We will hugely bring up the place value of the area, and so that fits really nicely. But you know, a lot of situations have high place value or the aspiration of high place value, but still need to provide some movement function. So this is where we get into some of the other things that that people are really well bringing up. There's a lot of people who are there looking to narrow the roadway itself, extend those footpaths out, widen that area. And that again is a really great way to increase place value, and it aligns well with safe system principles for a number of reasons. But is it going to impact on the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity? Well, there's sort of arguments on each to a degree. Really, under the safe system assessment framework, to influence the exposure, that narrowing would have to influence the AADT, the traffic volume. So you might get that from some modelling or the like, if you've taken away lanes or things like that. You might get that from you know, your estimate on how that will alter, or if people are going to use other routes in terms of the passenger vehicles. In terms of the pedestrians and the cyclists and the motorcyclists, again, it boils down to the numbers. What numbers will be using it after this is all done? So that's the exposure. So people would be very tempted when you propose a narrowing like that, or a widening of the footpaths, to say that there's less exposure because there's less time on the road to cross. Now, you're right in the sort of traditional way we looked at exposure within road safety, but under a safe system assessment, I suppose just for ease and clarity, boiled that down to an alteration in the likelihood of crashes. And so have a look at those fact sheets to get a bit of a gauge on that. Removal of parking came in there, and it was nice to see that some people who were saying removal of parking also put within that same flexion the widening of the footpath, because that's always a concern that we have in these sorts of sort of street environments, where if you remove parking, you provide this wider facility with possible higher speeds of passenger vehicles which increases our likelihood and severity of crashes. So removing parking on its own right can reduce the likelihood of crashes a little bit because of opening up sight lines and kids not being sort of hidden in those sight lines of cars, but that can be swamped by the increase in likelihood because of the higher speeds and the severity and the increase in severity because of the higher speed. So just when planning to do that, complement it with other measures to keep speeds down, and you've got some really good wins. So exactly like widening the footpath. Converting to one way was an idea that came in there, which has a lot of merit. But again, does that influence the exposure, the likelihood, or severity? Well, to work that out, you would have to understand how that alters the vehicle flows. And if you've converted it to one way, but you're still getting the same number of vehicles through there because it's sort of become a circulating area or the like, your exposure actually would stay the same. If it's significantly reduced the number of vehicles, then your exposure would go down. But it's likely to reduce the likelihood of crashes predominantly because it's less complicated for pedestrians crossing, for cyclists, and also for vehicles as well. So some things in there around landscaping, which is definitely going to add to that place value. How it would improve, I suppose, alignment with safe system principles is a bit undefined. You'd probably want to have a think about, is that going to somehow reduce speed of passenger vehicles or the like? That's where we'd get that alignment with safe system principles if you could sort of show that connection. We've got speed limit reductions influencing both the severity and likelihood, so spot on there, well done. So segregated cycle facilities, if the speeds and traffic volume cannot be further reduced. So that's right, and that extra clarification on that point is the really important one, which was sent in there by somebody, because in these high place areas, you would actually much prefer to not be segregating cyclists and pedestrians, and to actually be integrating them into that area, because I suppose segregation in the sense of vulnerable road users away from passenger vehicles like that is more conducive to movement function than place function, because you're not having that ability to sort of have that good interaction. So those were the main ones, and lots of people putting in really great stuff there. So well done. Thank you for that. I suppose here's another artistic impression on the same one with more place value and a higher alignment with safe system principles. So a lot of the things that that you were suggesting there in terms of widening the footpaths, narrowing it down, making it one way, and you know, I would argue that even in this artistic diagram, that crossing point is somewhat not required, and we could make this whole area sort of a shared zone area. And so vehicles are, you know, really the odd one out here, as in cars or even any trucks, which we'd hope wouldn't be going through there. So because it was identified as a place for people, actively making it very hard for vehicles to go through there, and if they do, going at very, very low speeds, gives us a big tick in terms of safe system alignment, but also gives us a big tick in livability, in place value, in this wonderful, wonderful sort of area to live and to trade and to have social interaction. And we really can get those speeds extremely down. 10 kilometers per hour, maybe operating speed, or you know, those sorts of things are possible in these areas. But it really does require that work with the strategic planners and the urban planners to push them push them and say, yeah, what are we doing with this area? What are the aspirations? What do we want to see it like? And there's really good examples around the world and in New Zealand of this sort of thinking, quite progressive. There's areas where of the world that still only see roads as movement corridors, and these pesky ideas of having it as a place is just getting in the way of pumping vehicles through there, which we've got to understand that each road or street has its purpose. Some of the little interesting things that I bring up in even an artistic diagram like this is little subtleties like the pedestrians, the cyclists wearing helmets and things like that, because we do get fixated on our infrastructure because a lot of us are infrastructure engineers of one description or another, or technical designers of infrastructure and the like. But do remember, it is this holistic system. So even when we are just looking at an area like that, so thinking about, are there ways we can get improved behavior from road users? Are there vehicle things that we could influence? We are hand in hand speed with all of this as well. So that was good. If that movement has risen up a bit in that it is still a place for people, but it's recognized, no, this is coming up and up and up for the movement requirements, and you've been pushing the strategic planners to give you more of a place function, or to be clearer on this, but they said no, the movement corridor is still important there for you can start to provide some of this separation, but ideally first we're going with that more integrated, and then we start to step into the separation there, and you can see the cyclist facility and the roadway and any crossing points which have been defined up very slow. But we're still seeing a very slow speed environment, a big wide footpath narrowed down, and quite a nice facility there. When we get into the local streets one, it becomes an interesting one where we're saying low place value, which this looks like quite a nice green leafy street, a lovely place, but from that holistic place perspective, not providing us that huge value. But nor is it providing this major movement corridor or movement function. It's really servicing to get people to their houses and then maybe to collect their garbage and the like. But that's really the purpose of the roads and footpaths in these areas. Occasionally used as recreational areas as well, which probably adds a bit of the place value too. So. I probably won't do this one because it's got a lot of similarities to the last one. And the reason I suppose it does that is when you're in that low place value, low movement value, the protection of our vulnerable road users becomes sort of paramount, or sits up there in terms of priority for the safe system alignment. And you can do that because you can continue with the low movement philosophy. So in these sorts of areas, I mean, this is a very busy artistic impression of a residential area, isn't it? But nonetheless, we can sort of look to do similar techniques of increasing the vulnerable road user protection, the pedestrians, the cyclists, by narrowing things down, slowing vehicles, restricting vehicle movement through there. Because if it's been identified there as that low movement function, it gives us a real ability to leverage off that lower speed, and you can do that in in many ways. And you also get a benefit of even more place value. And I think people are quite aware of this sort of stuff we can do. But we have, as infrastructure engineers, for many years, sort of utilized our local area traffic management as a as a road device, I suppose. But I think the ability to get lower speed through ramping up place value does make sense, because you get a much more livable area with that lower speed. So if I go back to this one, the idea of putting speed humps here or the like, yes, it would get us our safe system outcomes in terms of lower speeds and less likelihood of crashes and severity of crashes, but it really wouldn't do a huge amount for the place value of the area. But if we can do this sort of stuff, we've got just win-win all around. And I firmly, I suppose, believe in urban areas, our safe system discussions with the community can be sort of under the banner of increasing place value of their areas. I mean, that's what they want. The road safety is a little bit too abstract in the sense that the individual road user is so low risk as an individual in terms of road safety issues that it's hard to sort of comprehend. You get a fair bit better in these residential areas because they're worried about their kids and the like. But it's also that ability to have it as a place for people. So I think there's wonderful opportunities from that perspective. I'll pause there, Kathy, and see if there's been any comments or questions I need to deal with before we jump onto another little scenario. And we'll probably pause for a little stretch break and a fill up of coffees in a couple of minutes.
Terrific. Thanks, Ken. No comments at this stage.
Okay. So I'm going to move to the vibrant streets, and the vibrant streets are hard. I was a project manager for an Austroads project called Mixed Use Safe System for Mixed Use Arterial Roads, yeah, I mean, it's really safe system for vibrant streets was how we could have retitled that with a bit more movement and place thinking. It was a while back when we did that. But let's take this, and it might not be the best example of, no, it's actually not too bad, because what we've got here is a bit of road which is currently dominated by movement, but let's do a hypothetical where the strategic planners and land use urban planners have decided, are saying, well, we actually want this area to be a higher place value. It's going to have, we want more trade, we want more interaction, we want more people, mingling and the like. But we still need to keep that movement because it's the main sort of north-south connector that we have. So, giving the very challenging task as I talked about. So let's do that same little exercise, except for this time when you write in anything, I want you to put a little bracket or a dash and say exposure or likelihood or severity or a combination. So what you'll see here, yeah, we've got a 70-kilometre road with a sort of service road there. There is a pedestrian overpass there. You can't see the top of it, but you can see the stairs up. And little bits of sort of fencing in the middle and the like. So let's now see, what are you thinking, acknowledging that this is trying to also provide that high movement function as well as the place function. So quite challenging there. So let's pop a few ideas in. I'll give you a minute to do that. And in fact, because we've sort of little bit over halfway through the timing. I'm going to give you a good few minutes to do that. So I want you to have a think about that, jot a few things in, and then you can stand up and have a stretch. You can go fill your coffee up, and we'll be back into it in about 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Do we have a budget, Ken?
No budget. No, today is a day of no budgets. Just you have freedom.
Wow. What to do? Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, and we've seen some good comments coming in, and I'll give people another minute as they get back to their seats with their nice soy chai latte in hand. Okay, so let's have a little look at what ideas are coming in on these sorts of road environments where we've said it has a high place, we want it to have high place value, but also this high movement. And I think the first sort of questions being asked, and Adam's sort of hit the nail on the head there, is how are we defining this movement of people and goods? Is it mainly by passenger vehicles, cars, or is it through other means? And that's absolutely right, because we know we've got the ability to use buses, to use bikes, to use feet for major movement corridors as well. So good questions to be asking, because it all helps you to refine and come up with what is the most appropriate infrastructure changes or any other changes. We've got some good ideas there in the wider scheme of things, and sort of providing these bypasses, motorways, or even, I suppose, going underneath with the major passenger vehicle and freight movement is absolutely going to give us wonderful ability to alter things. They are obviously very expensive and big picture strategic planning decisions, but nonetheless, that's good thinking and good way for us to align with safe system principles when we're able to do that sort of stuff. But then if we sort of narrow it down and we can't afford any of those things, if, you know, I said there was no budget, so those are all really legitimate things to be talking about. But if we, you know, are finding ourselves in these scenarios, and this is probably the times we're starting to give that segregation where we possibly can, in order to try to keep sort of vehicles up to a reasonable speed for the majority of it. But anytime we have those conflict points, reducing the speed. And we see lots of people talking about reallocation of road space, different lanes, and still a bit more widening of footpaths and things where possible, and grade separated facilities and the like. The grade separated facilities, yeah, can be a little bit of a challenge when you've still got that high, or you're still trying to achieve high place value, but can provide that ability to cross from place value to place value, but somewhat degrades a little bit of place value. So these are great, and in terms of the different exposure, likelihood, and severity things we're seeing there, if we bypass or tunnel, that is going to change the exposure to crashes. If we're providing those separated facilities in terms of a cycle path, it could be exposure, it could be likelihood. Most of the time I categorize it as likelihood, unless it's a physically separated with a good bit of distance, or physically separated with some sort of barrier system. Then I would change it to exposure. But there's, as I said, there's a whole fact sheet on that, because it's, you know, quite a head scratcher to try to work out whether you're going to attribute that to a change in the exposure or the likelihood. But certainly any sort of cycle lane or the like would just be a likelihood alteration. Okay, let's have a look at the little artistic image, and let's alter it a fair bit. And you can see there is that that separation, and what I think is important to also remember is that this cycle facility here is actually providing us movement function. So I think a traditional traffic engineering look at that would say that there's been a big loss in this movement function. But I think we need to sort of recalibrate our thinking a little bit, as one of those really good comments came in about, well, how are we achieving this movement function? And that gives us a lever to really protect the most vulnerable road users, being the pedestrians and the cyclists there, because we're acknowledging that that's the movement corridor. So when you try to build these big separated cycle facilities and the like, it's often talked about as degrading the movement function. I would say the opposite. If you're able to get people onto those bikes and you're increasing the movement function for people, it just happens to be that they're on bikes in this instance. But you can see it's still got the movement corridor through there at a reasonable speed, you know, at the 40 km/h. And we need to be sort of acknowledging in these areas that also hold that high place value that we're going to have interaction with vulnerable road users, and there's these reasonable speeds through, and a lot of encouragement of control and ideally speed assurance, I suppose, at any conflict points. So be that raised platforms and dedicated pedestrian crossing facilities. So this one, I suppose, this artistic example did remove that sort of grade separation to try to make sure that there's that continual or enhancement of the place value of it. But you might find some circumstances where movement has gone up and a grade separated facility might be the way for pedestrians. But those are often a bit of a big waste of money when they're not done well, as in people don't use them and they cross at grade anyway, and it kind of erodes the area. But if you really, as your movement function increases, it often becomes the only option to achieve high level alignment with safe system principles. So yeah, keep your questions or comments coming in on that. And I think you're starting to see some of this injecting into New Zealand. So this is Christchurch, I believe. It must be, yeah. I remember taking that photo. And so we're seeing those sort of separated movement facilities for cyclists, and those are some good ways to deal with things. You're also getting these protected intersections appearing around the place, which are trying to still cater for that movement function and separating the cyclists through the intersection. Lots of different examples of those coming around Australia, at least. And I'm not sure if New Zealand's got any sort of protected signalised intersections yet, but you may. When we land in this sort of clear movement categorization, but it still retains a little bit of place value, what we're into is actively trying to continue to reduce the place value, I suppose. And that may sound bad, but we're really pushing the movement function of these areas. And so that does mean that we may restrict vulnerable road user access or permeability or the interaction and trade in those areas, and try to increase movement there with completely separated cycle facilities, so speeds can be maintained high from other vehicles as well. And these sorts of corridors in safe system assessments, we can push on some things that aren't, I suppose, popular in often the way we're thinking about things in those other categories, which are making it really lovely for pedestrians with slow speeds and lots of trade and interactivity there. But that's not the categorization and function of this road. And so, again, it's all about the context of it and what is fit for purpose for what we've decided from this perspective. So sometimes in safe system assessments where it's clearly been put into this movement categorization, I might recommend things like banning cyclists from the use of the road, or if there's a parallel route that is much better set up for cyclists. Now that's not popular, and I get lots of people, cyclists are real road users too. And I'm like, I'm a daily cyclist myself. I know, but we need to understand that we can't have every bit of road doing everything for every road user. We need to start to utilize the space we have for what we need. Now, there's absolutely no denying that kind of thinking will push the place value down of these of this road. But we've already acknowledged that in the movement in place, and that was what some other decision at a strategic planning level was made. This is our major movement corridor of freight, of people and goods, and if there's to be said that it's going to happen through the use of passenger vehicles, maybe and buses, or the like, well, the mix of vulnerable road users trading and congregating and interacting in these areas, or even having vulnerable road users in that mix of higher speed vehicle traffic is not going to get us high alignment with safe system principles, and so we need to start to segregate. And especially if we have these parallel great cycling facilities already, I think we need to start moving things down that direction. But they're very challenging from that perspective. Even with those high sort of movement corridors, and if passenger vehicles are sort of what has been said, you know, and trucks are the way that they want to do this, you still think about your energy and conflict points and slowing vehicles at these conflict points to try to minimize the harm that happens. So cyclists and pedestrians obviously are most vulnerable to injury, severe injury, 10% risk around the 20 kilometers per hour, and almost certain death for a direct strike around that 50 kilometer per hour. Now the young and old even more vulnerable, and also, so that's vulnerable to physical force, but also vulnerable to mistakes. I mean, more prone to mistakes, and there's some really good Austroads reports. They're old, but they're great, that looked into sort of the capabilities of older road users in terms of some of the challenges and how infrastructure can play a role in that. And there is quite a bit of, and there always has been on young road users, and especially around schools, and how that we can design for young road users. So we want to ideally manage our speeds to around that 20 kilometers per hour, if possible, where pedestrian volumes are significant. Otherwise, seek to separate as we increase them. And we talked a bit about these separated facilities, which are coming online, and they're really seen as excellent. And have a look at the fact sheet for whether they influence exposure, likelihood, or severity. Roundabouts. Roundabouts, we talked about in module 2 about them being this great facility because they reduce speed, improve conflict angle, and wake people up because there's something there and they're going through an intersection. Nobody has ultimate priority as they approach. The movement of pedestrians and cyclists around roundabouts has been problematic for a number of reasons. This is I suppose the Dutch way of looking at roundabouts and for pedestrians and cyclists has been something that we've gravitated towards. And so you see a facility like this having that raised pedestrian priority, cyclist priority around the roundabout. And so we get almost the best of all worlds out of these scenarios. And I think that one's been built. That's Moray Street in South Melbourne. So I could share some photos of the built product, and it's working beautifully. We did an evaluation of that treatment. The theory sort of holds for bigger, higher speed roundabouts to a degree. And so here's sort of conceptual level how you could have separated paths, and you know, if one leg was more minor, the priority could continue through. To do the right-hand turn, you'd come in, out through here, pause, and stagger your cycling crossing points. So there you would sort of be influencing the likelihood and severity, because you've got the slowing down, the raised platforms. At these locations, you'd be influencing just the likelihood of crash, because it does really rely on that cyclist looking and making appropriate crossing judgment. But if the mistakes happen, the severity is just as high, assuming that the roundabout was already there. If you put in the roundabout as well, so as a cross intersection, you would get a reduction in severity as well. Now, Kathy, any questions or comments coming in at this stage?
Just a query, the fact sheets are in Schoology, just a folder right at the bottom of the list. So looking for the green folder for anyone who's looking for those. But that's what we have at the minute. If you've got any other questions or comments, please keep them coming through.
Great, thank you. Oh, there's a little diagram. I mean, it's just the idea that in these lower speed environments, the sharing of road space between cyclists and pedestrians is a possibility. Maybe 30 kilometres per hour is sort of quite the upper end of what you'd be wanting to do there. Then you want to physically separate as you increase speed, and your parking can be a way to do that as well. And then absolutely completely separated off road facilities for the highest end speed. That's an adaptation of a Dutch diagram. Pedestrians, I can be fairly quick here. We would call this a wombat crossing. It's a raised pedestrian crossing, so I don't think it has a particular New Zealand name, but somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. So what we see is that a raised pedestrian crossing will influence the likelihood of crashes and the severity of crashes. But interestingly, just an at-grade pedestrian crossing, so without the raised element to it, we know that doesn't provide us much of any road safety value, and sometimes actually goes the other way in areas with sort of reasonable speed. We know that having just a normal old zebra crossing can increase our road trauma in a lot of situations. So this really basic sort of first assumption that I make is that if we have decided a point has enough pedestrian demand or enough sort of latent demand, so if we build something, we will get the pedestrian activity. If we've determined that, I feel that we have also got the warrants to slow vehicles down using a raised platform, or if you're very concerned about buses or something like that, maybe some sort of speed cushioning at the on the approach, which the buses can sort of straddle.
Ken, just a comment here on in New Zealand, they've had issues with poor contrast when using red under zebras. Do you have any commentary on that?
Not anything too insightful. It's just that this picture happens to be in New Zealand, and it's the only one I've seen with a red using red underneath it. It's not any. I don't see that done in any other country. So most just use a black or the like. Occasionally we'll go a yellow to try to highlight a pedestrian crossing area, but yeah, I don't know of any research or evidence to show that it improves things or the like. There may be out there that I'm not aware of, but yeah, it's an interesting point.
And if there's an interesting question about cyclists in packs. Can you tell us if you're aware of any developing research on the use of cycling facilities by cyclists in packs? What is the current best practice for how we should consider these cyclists versus more recreational cyclists?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because cyclists or people that ride bikes, as we like to term them, people that ride bikes are very varied in how they ride their bikes and what the purpose of riding the bike is, from recreational and many forms of recreational riding to all the way through to commuter and kids using their bikes to get to school and the like. So the idea of, you know, one solution fits all is definitely not going to work in these situations, except when we're talking about the speed of passenger vehicles, because that pretty much helps every type of cyclist. But it is a big challenge. The mammals, as they're called, the middle-aged men in lycra, and how do you, when you create these separated facilities and the like, these riders often just don't use them. So I think we need to probably think about that in a slightly different way. I don't think that voids our responsibility to create these facilities for those many other groups of people that ride bikes, commuters and the like, so that you're going to get still great value for that. And then maybe we need to start pulling levers of the other elements of the safe system to try to get safer outcomes for recreational cyclists and pack riders and those sorts of things. Well, we have had some success in different areas with those riders in working with the packs and the groups, if they're somewhat formalized, to say, oh, you know, are there particular routes you use, and can we sort of work with you on particular times and provide lower speed limits at specific times for you? And so, you know, it could be the 5 a.m. to 7 or 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. Saturday morning and Sunday morning, that a number of routes have a lower speed limit in place, considerably lower, so the pack cyclists are there, or at least warning signs for those sorts of things. There's been active warning signs implemented with cyclist detection on some of these very popular cyclist training routes. And I mean, it's kind of a slightly different use of your road use categorization, but if you do have those areas that are just really becoming extremely popular cyclist training routes, it might be time to sort of acknowledge that use and alter things accordingly. And we've seen that done in a number of areas in Melbourne. I know the ones particularly well, like Beach Road and Yarra Boulevard, which have just been acknowledged that the dominant road user is a recreational cyclist. And so we can either get sort of annoyed at that, or we can start to acknowledge that's how it's being used, and we should then start to alter it for that. And you can do that through dampening vehicle speeds down with treatments that don't impact on the recreational cyclists. But yeah, there's also probably behavioural change. There's training for vehicle drivers on how to act around cyclists and vice versa. So yeah, it's quite a minefield. So there's a raised pedestrian crossing, one-back crossing, and you also get a little bit of improvement with the raised nature of it through pedestrians that cross being in a better line of sight for drivers up higher, and obviously better for mobility impaired pedestrians as well. So I like to use this little example to say that we kind of know what safe system is for pedestrians and vulnerable road users, and we've known for quite a long time. We just haven't thought about it in that way. So this is an area in Adelaide quite a long time ago, and it was a 60 km/h road, and there was some workers who had to do some work in the island here down with the electrics and all this sort of stuff. So they were out there for 3 or 4 days or something like that, and these two workers being exposed to the 60 km/h vehicle risk was unacceptable from that workplace health and safety perspective. And so this got the protection with the barrier systems. It actually in South Australia gets a 25 km/h work zone speed limit. They use 25 km/h. So vehicle speeds are 25 km/h. Protection using barrier systems. And then the work finished, and they took away all the barriers and they put the speed back up to 60 km/h, and about 3,500 to 4,000 pedestrians a day stand right in these areas where those workers were. So we know the vulnerability is the same. Yes, the workers might be a little bit less alert of traffic because they're concentrating on their work, but I dare say that a lot of the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone or their or other things. And in fact, the general public are probably in a far worse state in terms of intoxication and all sorts of other varied factors out there for our travelling public. And so that was, to me, is a sort of vivid example, isn't it? That we afford a very high level of safety, a well-aligned safe system area for the workers, but we don't do that for the general public for some reason. And we just push all the responsibility back on the individuals. Take care of yourself. And so if I ever am asked, if I need to give my elevator pitch on safe system, it really just, I sort of refined it down to this very quick statement. I say, do you know occupational health and safety, how you look after road workers and the like? Yeah, afford that level of safety to the general public as well. And that's that gets us pretty close to safe system principles. Yes, there's lots of intricate challenges, but the elevator pitch is something that you need to boil down to 10 seconds, as they say. So shed all those complexities.
Sorry, Danny's shouting no end treatments in the chat.
Yes, Danny's spot on. So I've got some issues with no end treatments. There's some other issues in terms of connection of the barriers and lots of little bits and pieces. So we could use this for a temporary barriers course as well.
Earlier, you were talking about the raised platforms, and there's a question here about, is there any thinking about doing the raised platform before the zebra to slow drivers before the conflict with pedestrians?
Yeah, and I suppose when people move to using a speed cushion because of heavy vehicle or buses or the like, that's done in advance to slow vehicles on the approach. The raised platforms themselves actually, as I think you're probably aware, the vehicles are slowing on the approach to it because they're going to have to go up it. So they actually do slow on the approach. It's not the actual physical, you don't actually slow vehicles using the physical up and down. It's that they know that they're going to have to slow to get over that without damaging their vehicle and the like. So it kind of does work that way anyway. But yeah, speed cushions on the approach can be done. So again, we can raise the whole intersection, and same theory applies. Vehicles will slow on the approach to this because they know they've got to navigate over this raised area, and we're getting much better pedestrian outcomes. And when we've got the signals, does the likelihood, and we've got the raised, does the severity, we're getting pretty wonderful outcomes. When you're raising a whole intersection, this is just a little aside, these become quite important in terms of the swept path of large vehicles, because you remove any sort of curving. So having something to stop that becomes important. Little tip there. And vehicles turning in and then something raised as a threshold, but also a great crossing facility is good. And I like this area where a vehicle can store as they've darted in. So those are, again, good for likelihood and severity of crashes. Speed is so important, as we know, and even speed limit. You know, people say, oh, you know, will it work if we change the speed limit? Well, the year of the change from a default 60 km/h to default 50 km/h and is a pretty staggering change in pedestrian trauma outcomes. Number of casualty crashes per year there. Look at that, step change just by that default speed limit change, with all the advertising and information about it. But that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Okay, any questions or comments before I have a brief discussion about motorcyclists?
No, good to carry on, Ken.
Okay, motorcyclists is an area that I have done a lot of work in over my time and done a good bit of work in New Zealand with motorcycle safety, which has been rewarding. These are the sort of 5 things I like to think about for motorcycle safety: sight, surface signs, strike and speed. So strike being what is the motorcyclist hitting or what's hitting the motorcyclist in a crash. And when we look at likelihood or severity of these things, so being able to see a motorcyclist or a motorcyclist being able to see what's coming up, the surface on which they're riding, and the signs to warn and guide, they're all likelihood factors. They're going to influence the likelihood of the crash. Strike means a crash is happening, and this is all then about the severity of the crash. And speed's our magic little thing in road safety, isn't it? Because it influences both the likelihood and the severity of any crash, because there's more time to see something, to react, to avoid. But then if the incident does happen, it's at lower speed, and biomechanical tolerances and physics just comes into play, and we get less severe outcomes. So there's been some really groundbreaking research done by some Swedish people with a colleague of ours, Johan Strandroth, who worked in Victoria for a long time, well, a couple of years at least, and is now back in Sweden, but still working with us. This was to understand some of those crash curves for motorcyclists. And I've popped these into your into the notes so you can have a look at them later, but they're slightly altered from what we originally thought for motorcyclists, which was just to lump motorcyclists with pedestrians and cyclists, because we didn't know what else we could do. We see slightly altered in terms of the highest level serious injury, so an MAIS 3, which is the high level serious injury, sort of acquired brain injury and quite severe injury and fatals up there. So you can see some of these curves with different crash types. So I encourage you to have a look at those. And motorcyclists are sort of in this challenging position when we think about providing infrastructure or even legislative things or the like, where we sometimes treat a motorcyclist like it's a car, and sometimes we treat a motorcyclist like it's a cyclist or a pedestrian. More often is really like a car, but we know the severity outcomes are significantly different to a car. So it's a very challenging road user group. But there are some things we know that we can do in the likelihood influencing areas, and those are things like improving the just the sight lines. So motorcyclists can be hidden behind things quite easily. So there's a motorcyclist that sort of just appears from behind that tree. So even small things hide a motorcyclist. And so the likelihood of motorcycle crashes at intersection is usually a bit higher than most other road users because of the speed and the ability to be hidden behind other road users. The surface, so motorcyclists obviously leaning and with two small contact patches on the road, meaning that any surface issues increase the likelihood of motorcycle crashes, again, more than any other road user, really. We often refer to motorcyclists as the canary in the coal mine in terms of surface issues, because they're the first to be killed or seriously injured when there are these surface issues. And so we need to be, I suppose, especially looking at that in our safe system assessments when we're thinking about motorcyclists. And motorcyclists are their own specific categorization under a safe system assessment, which we'll get to next module, exactly how you need to go about thinking about this. I should say that I'm a licensed motorcycle rider, but I'm not an active motorcycle rider. I certainly got my license and did a bit of riding just to get an understanding of some of the challenges and what goes on out there. But spending my career investigating trauma with motorcyclists as well has certainly made me far too scared to actually get on a bike. Steel plates and these sorts of things, obviously slippery, and just increase the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. So something to be aware of. And there are many, many different surface issues that we need to be thinking about them: the plastic line marking, pit scrapes, any of these sort of potholes, depressions, and anything like that. All stuff that's just going to increase the likelihood when you come and do your safe system assessment. Motorcyclists are very attuned to signage, and so well-signed, consistent signage really can help to bring the likelihood scores down for motorcyclists. And there are specific motorcycle signs that you can use to warn riders of particular issues, and I understand some of these have been trialled in New South Wales, in New Zealand now. They have been tried in New South Wales as well, but that's yeah, so we're seeing a bit more of this. And the research on this one is really showing the motorcyclists are very attuned to understanding that's a specific issue for them, and you can put a supplementary plate to explain exactly what that is. And strike. So this is when the motorcyclist is now colliding with something. And this becomes a very challenging exercise for us in terms of managing energy back to those biomechanical tolerance levels that I showed in the earlier slide there, because the speed that we allow passenger vehicles to go, or motorcyclists as well, and meeting some of those characteristics is very challenging. It's challenging for passenger vehicles. It's even more challenging for motorcyclists because they're more vulnerable. And some of the really wonderful features we see for most road users can be beneficial for motorcyclists if they're done right. So here's some motorcycle crash testing of motorcycles into barriers, which is often seen as this big major risk issue for motorcyclists. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, because it's not as big an issue as I think it is perceived to be. But this is just the European crash test using an 80 kilogram crash test dummy with a few slight alterations to it. And you run it at 60 kilometers per hour. You slide the motorcyclist head first at the post. And you can see that at 60 kilometers per hour, that does significant damage. But if you've got underrun protection of some description, the damage is far less. And in fact, it goes very within survivable levels at the 60 kilometer per hour for the motorcyclist with the underrun protection and a way to absorb energy and deflect energy along the system. So I hope those videos are streaming for you. And there's certainly quite a number of underrun protections available for motorcyclists with barrier systems. And so those are a good thing to be looking at. The thing with motorcyclists and barriers is that it's somewhere probably around the 20% at most of motorcycle death and serious injury involves striking a barrier. It's probably a bit less than that, but you know, generally around that. We've got quite a number of motorcycle fatality and serious injuries that we can't get any accurate description of what was struck in the police reporting. But you know, if you assume that you know, a lot of those were barriers, we're up in the maybe 20% at absolute most. Then when you get sort of drill into what is that 20%, what type of barriers are being struck, almost all of them are a W-beam system, like the one we're seeing in the test here on screen. So either a public domain guardrail W-beam system, or possibly a proprietary product. But most of the past research has been very much this sort of standard public domain guard fence. And that's because it's sort of the most prevalent on the road network, and it's especially the most prevalent on any motorcycle touring routes or the like, because you couldn't use wire rope safety barrier on a tight radius curve, because, you know, if that's a tight radius curve and you put posts in there and then you tension up your wire rope system, we're looking down on it now, you tension it up, it wants to pop into the middle of the road. So it'll bend your posts over as you tighten it. So we don't use wire rope barrier systems on a curve radius. Actually, prize for the person who can tell me the minimum curve radius for wire rope safety barrier systems. Trivia for you, but you can't use it on very narrow curves. So you don't do that. Joseph, 200 is correct. Good job there. Somebody's been to their barriers training. Yeah, so on these popular motorcycle touring routes and the like, so the Coromandel Loop or the, what's that? Oh, I can't remember what it's called. You've got that big one over the top. It's going to be guardrail system. So we have the ability to provide this underrun protection, which can be a really valuable severity reduction technique for motorcyclists. The challenge we have with wire rope systems is we don't have any really good underrun protection for them. But we never really use wire rope systems in areas that are high risk for motorcyclists because of that challenge with curves, and they're really used as a fatigue management device in most scenarios. But and so there's almost hardly any, very minuscule amount of motorcycle barrier strikes are with wire rope systems, but they seem to get a lot of attention, which I always talk to when I'm doing my work with the motorcycle groups, is to say, and the best value in terms of improving safety for motorcyclists is not to spend our time trying to stop wire rope systems getting put out there. There's far more things on the list that are causing death and serious injury to motorcyclists than that one, and it's getting all the attention and discussion. But the MAG in New Zealand, the Motorcycle Advisory Group and the like are quite, well, a number of the members on there are quite understanding of the research and are quite reasonable in that sense. So you've got some good industry representation there that can assist. Yes, Kathy.
Oh, sorry.
No?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought we had questions or the like. So speed, obviously a big one across the board in terms of reduction in the likelihood and the severity. And it can be done through advisory speeds, chevron alignment markers, delineation, narrowing roads. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And also the regulatory speed limit reduction. And these all reduce the likelihood of crashes. The severity to a degree. I mean, reducing the speed from 110 to 100 or the like is not going to significantly reduce the severity for motorcyclists, because we're dealing with levels of trauma that is easily within enough to kill the motorcyclist. So the severity comes into play at different points. I'll pause there and see if anybody wants to have a little bit of discussion about motorcyclists, and then I'll just briefly explain what we're going to do next module, and priming you up to get you out and doing a safe system assessment. So any comments or questions come in there?
No, but Joseph, who got the question right about your barrier earlier, runs the barrier training in New Zealand.
Definitely been to the barrier training, runs it. So very good. So if you do have any questions, pop them in. We're going to have a couple of minutes at the end if we want to discuss anything. Anything that we've covered so far, or anything to get us in the position where we're all fairly comfortable with how, the principles behind the safe system, the philosophy, the way we think about infrastructure, the categorization of exposure and likelihood and severity, because next module is all about the mechanics of actually doing safe system assessment. Now, we needed to spend that time in these first modules to make sure we're all on the same page. We've got this philosophy down pat, we understand it, because this is just the tool for us to be able to go and inject this safe system thinking into projects or existing roads. And the Safe System Assessment Framework is the Austroads document, and you'll see there the meat of it. I like to say the meat of a safe system assessment is this matrix. And have a look at that. Exposure, likelihood, and severity. So I wasn't banging on about that just to annoy you. I was banging on about it because it is the meat of a safe system assessment, is putting a score next to the exposure to crashes, the likelihood of crashes, and the severity of crashes. And you've started practicing thinking about road environments and categorizing things, and you're going to get a bit more clarity on that. And then I'm going to take you through a work example next week and tell you how to actually find some scores to put in there. And then we want to think about the other elements of the safe system, or the other pillars as they called it back then, but I would certainly say elements. This diagram straight out of this Austroads document, which is the term pillars we kind of use, because I'm talking about that interactive element. And then we go into the treatments. So they're the main things. These are important in terms of setting your context and what exactly how deep an assessment are you going, but we'll go through that. So any questions or comments before we close out today's session? And Kathy, I'll hand it back to you in a second if you want to do anything, show people where maybe they can see their assignment scores, if marking and the like. And yeah, and feel free to comment, shoot us an email if you're not happy with anything or you want to resubmit. And I'm happy to reconsider if I've been a bit harsh. But most of you did very, very well, so I don't think you'll be too.
Good stuff, thank you, Ken. No comments at this stage, but I might just quickly share what you mentioned there, Ken, just so that people can have a look at where things are in Schoology, and also where your site is located. So you'll go through this on Thursday this week, but if everybody wants to have a look at module 5, and there's your site design is in here, so it's done by your name. Basically, it's somewhere near your home office location. So if you are not currently working near your home office location, or you've moved, or whatever the case may be, please get in touch with me once you've had a look at where your site is that we've assigned you. And we'll see what we can conjure up for you instead. So that's in the module 5 folder. And just in terms of, and I've just brought up Joseph, so this is how it looks to Joseph. But basically, if you want to have a look at the comments that Ken's made on your module 2 assignment, just jump into module 2. and you can see your items that you've submitted, your grade, and the little speech bubble there will give you your commentary. Or another way you can do it is also click on the grades tab and have a look at it through there. So there's a couple of things to think about before Thursday's session. There is a quiz again at the end of this session that should be made live, and I think that's about it.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think there's any other questions that have come in. So another good session, and a little bit different there in terms of focusing on some of those specific road users. And you'll find next module that we look directly at scoring pedestrian, cyclists and motorcyclists in terms of their crash types. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you at the next module, and there's a quiz to do.
Yep.
But no assignment because at the end of next module, you have the big assignment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.